Since the beginning of this podcast, almost 100 episodes ago, I have been mining my 30-year Superman fandom, starting with that tattered red cape, within the larger context of the character's rich 85-year mythology, examining, discovering, and reconsidering the creative visions that have shaped the last son of Krypton. Now, our milestone 100th episode beckons, and the journey continues. Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. Joining me to discuss his fan journey is a real-life Superman. You might know him as @WearingTheCape on Instagram, but here he is, Mr. Daniel Sanchez. Welcome.
Outed. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much. For people who watch on YouTube, that was a little treat there for our introduction, but thank you very much. It's a pleasure to finally speak with you. I know we've been communicating via Instagram, but this is the first time we've actually had a face-to-face, albeit virtually, conversation, and I'm really excited to talk to you.
I am too. And everyone should know we've not met. This is our first time to meet. We haven't planned anything. This is really just two guys becoming friends right in front of all of you.
Very much so. I want to say this right at the top, and this is not to blow smoke. I mean this sincerely. As you know, and my audience knows, I plan out episodes far in advance. And one of the things that's sort of been on my list for a while, that master Excel sheet, is an episode on Superman cosplay. And that's sort of where this started. And certainly we'll talk about your cosplay and what goes into the costumes and the look and all of that. But as I've learned more about you, your charity organization, Heroic Inner Kids, the work that you do, I've really come to learn and appreciate how far beyond mere cosplay this goes. And I'm just so blown away by what you and your organization do and have done. And I think it's such a testament to this character, what he's meant to so many of us fans, and what it can inspire some of us to do. It's such a beautiful thing. And I'm really excited to talk to you about all of this.
Oh, well, thanks. You know, it's always nice to know that you make an impact, whether it's recognized or not. But I'll certainly be more than happy to talk about the joy that it brings and what the symbol can mean to people in the times of their life where they need hope.
Absolutely. And I'll also say, too, one of the things that I'm excited with this episode in particular is it's an opportunity for us to talk about someone's Superman fan journey, right? That's the subtitle of the show. And every time I have someone new on, we'll spend a few minutes talking about their background as a Superman fan. But it hasn't been the main thrust of an episode since our pilot a few years ago. So, it'll be because we always have, so much ground to cover. We're talking about certain stories, as you know. So now this is an opportunity to really kind of take a step back, and a couple of people have asked for an episode like this. So hopefully this will sort of, satisfy that need. And I think it'll be a lot of fun. Now, this first question is going to sound self-serving, but you asked me to ask you. So how did you find the podcast initially?
I did ask you to ask me. I looked for you intentionally. I looked for the type of show that you were intentionally. I had been invited to go to the Christopher Reeve reunion in Detroit, up in Novi, which is just outside of Detroit, last year. And it was going to be my first opportunity to meet most of the surviving cast members of the Christopher Reeve films. And as a little aside, almost everyone that was there has flown with him on a rig, and they're one of only the handful of people who can say that they ever did that. And I just got in a mental space where, yes, I've been in the charity world for a while, but more as just trying to be worthy of wearing the cape, not necessarily to be standing in front of people who knew Christopher Reeve, worked with Christopher Reeve, were friends with Christopher Reeve, were very close with him throughout his entire journey. And to be feeling like I could fill those boots even just for 3 days made me want to really dig into not only what was Superman, but what did maybe Chris find that I could also find. And I obviously have grown up on the comics, and there's any number of interviews with Chris himself, but I wanted something deeper. I wanted something more. I wanted to possibly go to the same well he might have. And of all the places that I looked, yours was the one that I thought, that's it. That's what I'm looking for. And I just started listening. I was listening the 2 weeks up to that event. I was listening on the airplane. I was listening in the hotel room, and it was joyous because it really almost enveloped me in this appreciation for the core of what Superman is supposed to be, what he was created to be, what he still can be. And when I went to that first day, I realized I'm not there to try to convince anyone that I'm the next Chris, but I did want people to feel like the spirit of what Chris was trying to keep alive can still be kept alive. And you helped make me feel like that was possible, not just for someone to do it, but for me to do it. And so that's why I asked you to ask me, because I wanted to thank you in person. The fact that your episodes were there when I needed them is almost a full circle irony of what we're about to talk about, of Superman is there when you need him. So thank you, Anthony.
Listen, that's immensely gratifying, more than I can really, put in words, because this was ultimately born. I don't want to say out of a selfish desire, but I mean, it was really the sense of, I want to explore this character for myself, to educate myself. As much as I had been following the character for my whole life, there were still all of these gaps. And I just got to this point where I was like, this character has been a big part of my life for virtually my entire life, but I, I could articulate why at a certain level, but I wanted to go deeper, right? And it just got to this point where I'm
Mhm.
like, if not now, when? It just felt like this was the right time, and we were coming up on the 30th anniversary of the death of Superman. There were just a lot of things that were kind of coming together. And so being able to go on this journey of exploration has been immensely personally fulfilling. And, the fact that it was able to serve the role that it did for you, again, really is just absolutely fantastic. So thank you so much. Now, again, there's a lot to unpack, but I have to start here because I was so blown away when you shared this with me. So I'm gonna hold this up, and again, for people who are watching on YouTube, you can see it, and I'll post a photo of it. So this is a Superman watch from Fossil from 1993. I've had this since then. My parents got it for me. I have memories of wearing it as a kid. I don't know that I ever really wore it for that long a period of time, but this is one of those things, and I'm sure you have plenty of stuff like this, and the audience can identify as well. This is one of those things that every move that I've made, every time I've culled my collection or just personal effects, this is, one of the things that always stays, always with me. And I learned, you shared this with me via Instagram before we sat down. You designed this.
I did.
So I guess I'm jumping ahead because I do want to really start at the beginning and talk about your fan journey. But tell me about this, because I know just from being friends with you on Facebook and getting a little bit of a sense that you do have a background in graphic design. But I said this to you off mic, the connection points here and how all of these things are tying together. This item that I've had with me almost my entire life, and you designed it. It's crazy.
It never ceases to amaze me, the connection points that can happen in life either. Um, on this particular one, I can tell you that I was 22 years old when I did that, and I'll be 55 here in a couple of months, so it was quite some time ago for me. And the way that came about is no one had heard of Fossil. It was my first job out of college as a young graphic designer who literally would take any job. And I was told, there's this place, they make watches. They work in a warehouse in a small town in Texas. And I said, sold. So I was literally the sixth artist that Fossil Watches ever had. When I say we worked in a warehouse, I mean the big metal doors would go up and the trucks would pull in, and we'd have to hold down the paper on our drawing board so that the wind wouldn't blow them away until the big metal door closed. And 1991, when I graduated college, was the cusp of the difference of being able to graduate college knowing computers and not knowing computers. So it was my drawing skills that got me my job at Fossil. They didn't need someone who knew computers, they needed someone who could draw. And I had an illustration background because I've been drawing since I was 3 years old, mostly holding up Spider-Man comics to the glass uh, sliding door window with a piece of tracing paper and just drawing Ross Andrews Spider-Man until my own arms got tired. But I was hired because they asked me the question, can you draw a character from scratch? And I said, yes. Um, so fast forward, the Walt Disney license had already been acquired by Fossil. So they were doing, all the Walt Disney characters. Um, but the chance to get DC came in. And so we did the pitch and we worked who knows how many hours to win that account. And one of the things that I pitched was a watch based on action number one. And so when we got the go ahead from DC, um, I told the production manager at the time, I said, okay, here's what I want to do. Fossil's known for putting things in packaging that's really unique. I want to put this in a rocket. And the founder of Fossil looked at me and he goes, a rocket? What the hell does a rocket have to do with Superman? So that is the reason that the world now has the phone booth for that particular watch. But I brought it out because I knew that we might be talking about it. So it's falling apart now. You can see the bottom sort of coming off of it. Um, but this is the original marker comp. And everyone, please go to YouTube so you can see this. But you can see that I drew um, the front and back, so exactly like it appears in the final. But if you look really close, you can tell that there's the there's the gap where it folds, and that's my original magic markers coloring from 1991 that sold the idea. So we had them manufactured, and I really insisted on authenticity. I wanted this to look like if you were a kid and you ordered this in the 1930s, this is what you would get, complete with your friend Clark Kent, the whole experience. And to me, part of that experience, and I'm holding up the strap here, is that the Superman logo would be embossed in the strap. And they sent this production sample with a note saying, it's too expensive, we're not going to do it. So what they ended up doing was what everyone now has had a chance to own since 1993, which is either a black or brown strap with rivets in the holes. But I, like you, Anthony, every time I move, every time I unpack something, that original prototype stays with me always. It is one of my most treasured items and experiences. Just to know that people love it and that they appreciate it for what this 22-year-old comic fan really wanted to make.
It's amazing. I wish I still had the case. I don't. I remember it. I don't remember when I parted with it, but I remember having that phone booth. But I haven't had it. But again, the watch has stayed with me. I'll ask my mom because I don't remember. Like I feel like either or both of my parents just got it and brought it home. Like I don't have a memory of going to get it, but I just have that
Mm-hmm.
memory of having it. So that I would need to double check. But it's one thing when you like there's a comic story or something that means a lot, and you see the credits, right? You know who wrote and drew it, and maybe you'll have an opportunity to correspond with them or meet them at a convention or something like that. But if not for this random connection, right, that we know we made, it's like how I would never have known this was you or have had this opportunity to talk to you. That's again, I know I keep coming back to this word crazy, but it is.
It is, and I've become close friends with Jim Bowers over at the Cape Wonder Network, and he and I talk about this all the time. In and we've come to believe that there's sort of a magnetism that happens when these kids who grew up with the desire to absorb these stories that became a desire to want to be as good of a person as the person that was in our favorite stories, to be inspired by that, and then who actually did grow up into those people. There's some crazy way that those people meet. Like there's an attraction of the power that happens of people who just want to be that person in the world, that eventually we meet each other. It's like the reverse Highlander. There can be many, and we're drawn to each other. And I just think that whatever that effect is, it is fantastic.
Absolutely. You know, one of the places where I suppose that can happen and does happen is the Superman celebration in Metropolis, Illinois, which I
Hmm.
have not been to yet, but it's on the list. I think either this year or next year. I'm trying to round up some of my fellow Superman podcasters and try to plan a time to to go a year where as many of us can go together as possible, because I think that would be a really special experience. You've been, right?
I have not. I've
Oh, you've
also been
not.
waiting, sort of for this, the special reason to go. So yeah, so let's talk about next year. Maybe 2024 is our year to go. My wife has family in that state, so we can definitely make a trip of it.
Yeah,
Um,
that would be tremendous.
because you were mentioning how you think that your parents gave you that watch. I thought that I would mention that my love of comic book heroes was a similar reason. My father traveled all the time. He was a missionary. He was part of the mission field, and so he would be gone 3 months, 6 months, sometimes 9 months at a time. And I think to make it up with me, whenever he would come back, he would grab comic books from the airport, thinking, "I have a little boy. He'll love comic books. I'll walk in the door, and I'll have some gifts for him in my hand." So the very first comic that I ever got was this Superboy comic, which was, I believe, the first appearance of Aquaboy. So this is a 1971, I believe, comic back when they were 15 cents. And he would just bring them to me randomly, and then they turned out to be these amazing issues. That's the first Black Widow new costume in a 15-cent Spider-Man. And as he would bring these things to me, I would realize that some comics were better than others, and I couldn't figure out why. I didn't know about artists. I didn't know about writers. I just thought that there was a machine that made comic books somewhere, and I didn't know that these were humans and that could be a career. Um, and so I would just keep getting them. Like here's a Superboy, and it was one of the first crypto stories that I ever read. And talk about these crazy ways that life's events can happen. Here I am wearing the cape. I have a crypto. My friends are friends who love what I love. You know, it's it's so incredible for me to think that if I were to go back in time and talk to even my 4-year-old self, I would say, just wait, it gets even cooler. But my journey started the same way with my dad bringing me something that he thought that I would like.
That's fantastic, and that's where I wanted to go next. So that's a perfect segue as far as where this started. And so I know it started with that comic, but I guess my question: did you have any exposure to the character of Superman prior to that Superboy comic, or was that really the introduction to the character as well?
I want to say that the George Reeves TV show was happening for me at the same time in reruns. There was, gather around, kids. Here's a story that grandpas tell you. In the old days, there was a period of about an hour and a half after school where the television would show shows that you wanted to watch when you were a kid. And then that time was over, and the adults came home and they got to watch what they wanted to watch. But from about 3 o'clock to 4:30, that was your time. So you could pull out the beanbag, you could get your Fruit Loops, you could sit there. And for me, the lineup was Ultraman, Speed Racer, and The Adventures of Superman. And the house could be on fire and I would not move. To this day, I am a diehard fan of all three. Um, but I think that's what really drew me towards wanting to read the comics, because you only got so many episodes of The Adventures of Superman, and you wanted more. And I was one of those kids who wanted to read early, and I think that was just the perfect way to have me read and read and read and read more, and that's how it started. But the show at the same time.
That's awesome. Well, we'll have to get you on my Adventures of Superman rewatch podcast as well at some point, because it'd be great to, to hear from someone who especially grew up watching it. A lot of the people I've had on uh, were kind of in a similar boat where we came to it more recently, especially when Warner Brothers put out the DVDs in the mid aughts
Hmm.
and all of that. But it's always particularly interesting to hear from someone, and I have someone in that category for one of my upcoming episodes who grew up watching it. And same type of thing. It was just such a part of that routine, and coming home after school or in the summers, in his case in particular, and just gathering around and watching and enjoying it, and having that be the introduction to the character. So that's fantastic. I love that the George Reeves show could serve that purpose, because again, while I am newer to it, it's been such a joy going through and discovering that series. It's become one of my favorite takes on the character.
Oh yeah, it was formative for me, and I'm sure you've met other people who that's true. But I can tell you that the single most indelible memory that I have of any of those episodes was the one where he cured the girl's blindness and then flew her around the world so she could see everything. And as a little boy, I think my heart just got so big. It made me want to do that. And um, I would have to cite that as one of the main things that stayed with me all my life in a in an infancy state of I want to do this somehow, some way, someday, not knowing that one day I would get my chance. But that episode to this day uh, warms my heart like no other, and defined for me more than the comics. That single episode defined for me what Superman was supposed to be.
Around the World with Superman, right?
Hmm.
It is
Hmm.
such a beautiful episode. It's a favorite of mine as well. It's really up there. And yeah, to your point, you get to see it. It's great to see our standard, more traditional Superman stories where there's a villain of the week, but to sort of see more of this human interest angle. And in the context of that show in particular, I loved how tough George Reeves was, especially in those first two seasons, as both Clark and Superman. But there were a number of instances, and that episode is a great example, where you see when he's interacting with a child in particular, the warmth, the tenderness, right, that comes out, and it just shows you what Superman can do,
Hmm.
right, in a way that's different than fighting the bad guys as it typically is. So I'm not shocked that episode made an impression. It's one of my favorites as well.
Yeah, and to me, skipping ahead to Christopher Reeve, so uh, I was 10 years old when that movie came out. I was 9 for Star Wars and 10 for Superman. So what a great time to be a kid. Um, but what I saw in Christopher Reeve was what I remembered from George Reeves, which was he didn't have to pose, he didn't have to puff up, he didn't have to brag, he didn't have to show off. Um, he was strong because he was gentle. His kindness was his heroism, and that was the around the world with Superman. And so that's the era that I was um, formed and informed by. And I don't think that will ever be different. I appreciate everyone's interpretations, but as far as what molded and forged how I see Superman and what he can do, um, it's taking the time with one child, saving one person's desire to continue in the world. That's Superman, one at a time.
I would imagine, since you say that iconic page from All Star Superman where he intervenes when that young woman is on the ledge probably
Hmm.
evoked a response, right, and probably brought you right back to exactly what you're talking about,
Hmm.
right?
Exactly. You're stronger than you think you are.
Yeah, it's never as bad as it seems. You're stronger than
Hmm.
you think you are. It's such a powerful moment. So as you know, right, from listening to the show, I often couch this in terms of the tent poles of our Superman fandom. Like for me, Death of Superman and Smallville and the Triangle era. So for you, as far as your tent poles, George Reeves, Christopher Reeve, what else would you potentially include? Are those really the two biggest ones?
Um, well, I can't deny that watching Super Friends on television as a kid isn't a tentpole. Um, they had a charm, and I was the right age for it. And the thing that I remember is that they were all friends. And even as an adult looking back, whether the episodes stand up or not, that's not the point. But the lesson was that here you had these people who put aside everything else because what they were doing was for others. It was not about them. And as a kid, I took that to heart. I almost took it as just fact. Superman and Batman are friends. Fact. And I think a lot of my childhood relationships, especially because I moved around a lot, again, my dad's job, I just took the Super Friends approach of, okay, this is a new episode. There are new characters. By the end of this episode, we will be friends. Fact. So definitely a tent pole there. Um, I would say that those were the main ones. Um, 1986 was a great year for comics for Superman, though. Between the whatever happened to the Man of Tomorrow, the Crisis on Infinite Earths episode where he's got that great George Perez cover of him holding Supergirl. Um, there were just these redefining moments where in that year I was 18 years old, and that effect that can happen when the writing grows as you grow. I was the right age for Super Friends, and then I was the right age for when 1986 happened, when Alan Moore did his love letters. I mean, even Crypto got the heroic moment. Um, that was a tent pole because I realized that Superman could grow as I grow. I've heard my daughter talk about the Harry Potter books the same way, that she felt like that those characters stayed with her as she experienced the more adult things in life. So definitely that, and even the Dark Knight Returns, the way that Clark and Bruce interacted was very thought provoking. And I was in my first year of college, and I would wait for those to come in, um, and I would read those, and I would say, "Wow, like it's possible to be so focused on doing good that you have no idea how people perceive you." And you that line about that the entire problem that humans had with the superheroes was the endless envy of those who were not blessed. And I really sat and thought about that, and I realized that the the humbleness and all of that is great, but the naivety that Superman has, Bruce may be right that that's a vulnerability, that's a weakness. And so here I am at this formative year at 18. I'm away at college. I'm in a different state from where I've basically lived for a decade, and I'm learning myself. I'm learning who I want to be, and I'm reading this and I'm thinking about this, and I'm not pondering Kierkegaard. I'm pondering the role of Superman and his perception of what is good. Is good that you have a good effect, or is good that your intent was good? And I'm starting to crack that open of who will I be in the future. So tentpole.
That's amazing, man. You were the right age for a bunch of really,
Hmm.
really cool, important stuff. I've recently delved into Super Friends, and it's one of those things where I'm only going to get so much mileage out of it coming at it from a modern lens and adult eyes. But even within that, there was a lot that I still enjoyed about it, and more than anything, and I talked about this when we covered it, I can 1,000% see what an impact this could have on kids watching it during that period of time. And I also was so struck by how long it ran, which I guess was something that hadn't fully dawned on me, and how this was such an iconic representation of these characters for a whole generation, for so many years. So yeah, props to Super Friends. And as you're talking about whatever happened to the Man of Tomorrow, I want to ask you because, as you know, I just covered it just a few episodes ago,
Hmm.
and I put out the episode and people seem to enjoy it, which is great. On Twitter in particular, a few people started talking about the story, and a few people expressed the opinion that it's dark and quite harsh given the high death count in the pages of the story. And we did talk about that in our episode. It is a bit of a bloodbath. A lot of characters meet their end, but I don't know. I've never, it was funny hearing that response, and I get where people are coming from, but, I never looked at it as an overly dark story. And I wonder if it's that the very end and the wink, that hopeful finish that sort of colored my perception of the entire thing, or but I'm just curious, especially since it was formative for you, how do you view that one in particular?
I didn't think it was overly dark. Um, I I completely bought into the idea that a fifth dimensional imp in a bowler hat was not the real story, and for him to reveal himself as a villain that would do anything and cause anything just seemed to make sense. But I think what I did appreciate were the moments of the heroism and the sacrifice that you wouldn't have gotten if not for that scenario. You wouldn't have had the moment where Lana overhears Superman tell Perry that as much as he loves Lana, he has had one and only love for all of his adult life, and that's Lois. But he can never tell Lana because he knows how much it'll hurt her. But he can also never choose. And so for her to then turn to Jimmy and say, "No one loved him better than us," like that just turns your heart 360 degrees and puts it back where it was, but you felt the rotation. And um, I think I so appreciated that Alan Moore gave us those moments, which he could have only done in that desperate situation. And the fact that that love was not just words, it was they would die for him. And when she said no one loves him better than us, she meant it. Um, so I think I took it for that that message more than, oh, this is the beginning of the dark and gritty comics era. That is not how I took it at all. And Kurt, Kurt Swan didn't draw it that way, and it didn't feel that way, so I didn't take it that way.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree totally. I think our impressions of it are similarly aligned. I was curious, and it was fascinating to hear you give your take on it. So, for all those years, as you're watching Adventures of Superman, and actually along that period of time, are you reading comics regularly? Does it become like, and are you going to comic shops, newsstands? What was sort of the progression there?
So yes, actually, when I was 15, I had a total resurgence. We had just moved from upstate New York to Fort Worth, Texas. And I was doing my thing of, okay, new episode, new friends. Let's go out and make some friends. And I did two things. I was a keyboard player. And so I went to a music store and I basically just played Styx and Journey songs until I joined two bands. And then I found a local comic shop and I just started striking up conversations and ended up becoming friends with one of the guys who worked there who later owned the chain of them. His name's Ron Killingsworth, and we are friends to this day. But from age 15 through, I want to say 21, I was avid. I was involved in all the characters, all the storylines. I was reading George Perez's reboot of Wonder Woman. I mean, yes, I was very deeply steeped in it. Um,
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. And so, Superboy was the first comic. I would imagine that. I mean, I know that first introduction always makes a huge impression. So, as you've heard me talk about, the Superboy chapter in Clark's story is one that I've still not fully come around on, and I'm hopeful that I will when I eventually sort of delve into that period. But that history of Clark as Superboy, is that something that you still kind of enjoy and hold up and like as part of the character's larger journey?
I do, yeah. I've always been one who didn't want the Superboy part of the legacy to go away. I was a little sad when Burns sort of took it away, um, but I was so glad when Smallville, the show, came on. Um, but I really did like seeing um, the Lex Luthor in Smallville, the adventures that he used to have, because it gave more chances for life lessons from Ma and Pa Kent, which have always been some of my favorite parts of those stories. A Man for All Seasons is chock full of those. The new series Space Age has some wonderful Pa Kent moments that harken back to to a lot of those. Glenn Ford's performance in Superman the movie. So just watching Superboy try to have friends and try to understand um, when he makes a mistake that it's not the end of the world. And so, yes, some of the stories were a little silly, but again, like Super Friends, there were some takeaways that still stayed with you. And I watched Superboy make big mistakes that had big consequences, but it wasn't the end of the world. And so it sort of reassures you that you're okay too. It's all right if you make a mistake. It's not the end of your world either. There's We obviously see him grow up into an incredible man. Again, fact. So it had that reassuring quality to me of everything I'm reading here is okay because we know he grows up into this incredible man. So maybe some of my mistakes might be okay. Maybe the same thing will happen to me.
That makes sense. When I delve into that period of comics history, I will keep that in mind. Look, I absolutely love any instance of Clark in Smallville and exploring the upbringing clearly, right? I mean, Smallville
Mhm.
is essentially my number one. So the idea of Clark in Smallville, totally on board with. It's just this idea of him running around, flying around in a costume that I just there's something about putting it on for the first time as this threshold into adulthood that I like as the origin story. But I will keep an open mind, and certainly everything that you're saying makes sense, and I will take that to heart when I delve into that period. Were you a fan of the Superboy TV series?
So that was a bit of a gap in my fandom. I would watch it from time to time, but I didn't follow it.
Gotcha, gotcha. I think it's funny. That's one of those things. Even among hardcore Superman fans, I think that's still a gap for a lot of people to some degree or another. Myself as well. I've only kind of dabbled in it. And then Smallville, I know you mentioned, and you're wearing a Blur T-shirt. Did you watch that all the way through?
All the way through, every episode, all 10 years.
Awesome, awesome. Well, and as you were talking about the comics growing up with you, and being with you at various points in your journey in different ways, I identify with that 100%. And I know I've said this, but I look at Smallville, and that hit when I was a freshman in high school, and Clark was a freshman in high school, and I
Hmm.
was with that character for those 10 years. And then all of a sudden, flash forward a bunch of years, and we get Superman and Lois, right? So the story of Clark as a father very shortly after I've become a dad myself. And it's that same type of thing where it's just the Superman story that I needed at just the right time. And
Hmm.
it's just weird how the the character and the mythology provide what you need at just the right moment. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I, you know, I smile only because I don't imagine that ever stopping. I could see 20 years from now, there's another two gentlemen talking about, oh, do you remember the stories that came out in 2025? Do you remember the movies that came out? How formative they were. We were just the right age for those. I would love to see this spirit continue for everyone. And I have no doubt that that's not how it will be.
Yeah, I know. I absolutely agree with that. So at what point does cosplay enter the picture for you? At what point do you have this idea that I'm going to dress up as the character? And what was the initial context or setting for this? Because I know conventions are
So
are often the most common vehicle for something like this.
absolutely. So the answer to how I got in cosplay is slightly different, although it intersects with how I entered the charity world. But I can thank Speed Racer for how I got into cosplay because, and I looked this up one day because I thought, when was the day where it all happened? I'm pretty sure it was February 17th, 2017, here in Dallas. There was going to be a comic convention, but it was uh, advertised that the Mach 5 would be there, and the Batmobile, and the Ecto One, and the Jurassic Park vehicle, and a lot of other really cool things. But the Mach 5, the real drivable, actual Mach 5 that I could go sit in and have my picture taken. And I told my wife, I said, look, I have to sit in the Mach 5. I just have to. Um, and I said, here's the thing though. It's one of those conventions where people dress up and they do the whole costume thing. And she sort of gave me this look, and I said, I know, but you know, Halloween wasn't that long ago. Let's just pull out the same two things we wore. So we went to the convention center as Laura Croft and Tony Stark. Absolutely no reason other than that they were our Halloween costumes. And I get there, and the car's not there. The group that had them didn't show up, and so there was another group there that was taking a big photo, and I'll get back to that story later. So I ended up just walking around with my wife, and who should I run into but my childhood friend Ron Killingsworth, who used to work at that comic book shop in Fort Worth, who now I found out inherited it from the owner and expanded, and now has a whole chain of them. And I spent the whole afternoon talking with him, and so many people came by and said, "Tony, oh, you're a great Tony. What a fantastic Tony you are." Um, I got bit by the bug, and my love of making things. Obviously, the Daily Planet newspaper that we started off the show with as a gag, but just that creative part of me thought, what a new outlet this could be to try to be convincing with everything that I do. So I ended up making a head to toe Winter Soldier with my own version of the arm that I figured out for myself that ended up going uh, pretty viral on the Replica Proc forum, which is the best of the best, these Hollywood guys that make things. Um, and I did a Bruce Banner. I have a face that looks a little like Mark Ruffalo, so that was not too bad. You just part your hair on the other side, and no one notices. That's how it works, right? Um, but I just met the best people and really had the best time putting these things together and taking them out for a spin. Um, and then ultimately that led into you can't help but meet other wonderful people, and then you find out what they do, and they do it in the charity world, and that's a whole other story. But it was all about Speed Racer. He kept he kept hooking me in.
It's amazing to hear that. So someone who's been on the show a bunch of times, a good buddy of mine, Justin DeVoe, he does an incredible Lobo cosplay, and
Mhm.
we've spoken about it a lot. And he has undergone this incredible fitness journey and transformation. And to this day, he gears up for one New York Comic Con, and then the training continues, and he amps it up for the next one. And it's been such a positive outlet for him, and it's been a beautiful thing to see. And I've actually not been at a convention with him, but I see all the photos and everything of the people who want to take the pictures and come up. So I have a little bit of a sense. And then personally, this is just barely dipping my toe in the water, but my wife and I, on our 1 year anniversary, we went to New York Comic Con and we dressed up as Matt Murdock and Elektra from the Netflix show. So we're, especially on the Matt Murdock side, we're not, I just wore a suit and the red glasses. I mean, so it was nothing crazy, and that's the thing. I don't want to say we put no effort. We definitely put thought and, wanted it to be, relatively accurate, but At no point did I think, oh, people are going to come up to us. Like, truly. And people did. I mean, it's not like we were
Hmm.
swarmed, but there were like people who came and wanted to take pictures or said, "Oh, hey, Matt, hey," and I say all of that to say I know exactly what you're talking about, where you get a response like that, and it's a completely different way to experience a show, and I'm not surprised that it lit that fire, and especially given your art background. Now, kind of on that note, I know you had mentioned holding up the comics and drawing from that. How big of an influence were comics in fueling your passion for art?
Almost total. I was not kidding about that's how I learned anatomy was by drawing Spider-Man. Um, my mother is Guatemalan, and so when I was young, she would make extra money translating. So she had all these sheets of paper, just these white, you know, letter size typing paper sheets, and she knew that a way that I would let her do her work and not bother her as a young boy was to give me, X number of those sheets of paper, a small stack, and a couple of pencils, and let me just go draw. So I spent hours and hours and hours wanting to be the best kid in the neighborhood to draw comics. I wanted to draw my own comics. I wanted to grow up to write comics. Um, and it didn't take long before that was just a life goal, and I did end up going to art school. And but yeah, it was. I can't say I went to a museum and had an experience, or one of my relatives is an amazing artist. It was 100% comic books.
That's amazing. Who are some of your favorite comic artists, either classic or current?
Oh my gosh. Um, well, Jose Luis Garcia Lopez um, was the first time I realized that's why some Supermen look better. Later, I realized that my favorite Spider-Man artist, Ross Andrew, was also one of my favorite Superman artists. That famous picture that I'm sure everyone has seen of Superman and Spider-Man back to back, he drew that. Neil Adams, of course. Um, I grew up reading a lot of the world's finest. Again, Superman and Batman are friends, fact. And Neil did some amazing covers for those. One of the formative uh, Neil Adams covers that I kept with me into my cosplay days was his Heroes for Hope cover, where Superman and Batman are in Africa and they're trying to help the starving children, and Superman is on his knees. And the way that the red cape drapes on Superman's shoulders in such that Neil Adams way that we're so used to seeing in Batman, but I'd never seen it quite that way on a Superman costume. It was neither on the shoulder or behind him, it was sort of forward and perfect. Um, and I thought, okay, one day if I ever make a costume, I want it to look like the Neil Adams costume. Um, I also love the heck out of what Bill Sienkiewicz can do with Superman. Um, but if I had to pick one modern artist that just makes my heart glow, it would be Tim Sale. Tim Sale all day long. Um, the gentleness that he puts in, it's the strength and gentleness that to me is the totality of Superman, from George Reeves to Christopher Reeve to, I mean, Tim Sale, morning to night, absolutely my favorite.
He's one of my favorites as well. I mean, For All Seasons is one of those stories. You talk about the watch and something that you always hold on to. For All Seasons is one of those stories. I can't imagine ever reading comics and not coming back to that every year or every couple of years. And I know they just DC solicited an absolute edition of it.
They did, yeah.
And historically, I've not really been a big absolute guy, more for space than anything else, and price as well. But this is something I might make an exception, because just to see that gorgeous art and those colors on that size of paper, I think would be pretty amazing. So yeah, it's and it's so sad to have lost him, so recently, so soon. Um, as far as other current artists, I wanted to ask you, and I know we're jumping ahead in your cosplay journey here, but Wilfredo Torres, right, who
Hmm.
drew the Superman 78 miniseries, and I mean, it was so incredible, and I'm sure you identify, right, as such a fan of the Christopher Reeve movies, to see that world brought to life on the comic page. So it was just gorgeous. But he drew you in your
He
Superman
did.
costume.
He did. Yeah. And let me tell you, he did not tell me he did it. So I had met him, and we had become friendly acquaintances at the Superman reunion, and had some great talks, and became very chatty on Instagram, afterwards. Um, but I just woke up one day and scrolled through, and all of a sudden, right there on his page is a drawing of me and in my costume from Wilfredo Torres, and
Spinning a
um,
basketball, right?
yeah, spinning a basketball from one of the charity events that we did at an arena here for the Dallas Mavericks farm team basketball team. Um, and I don't know. There are some honors and compliments that you can get in the world, but to have that happen, um, that 5-year-old child in me said, "Oh my gosh, you were right. It does get even cooler." Um, it's and believe me, I wrote him a very long, gushing expression of how that made me feel. But yeah, absolutely. And Christopher Meadows as well, who did a portrait of Christopher Reeve, who I think if I turn this the right way, you can see there in the background. One second. That painting is called Saving Grace. Um, he's only drawn 3 Supermen in his life. He's drawn Christopher Reeve, he's drawn the gentleman that posed for that painting, and he's drawn me. Um, so yeah, it's pretty almost undeservingly wonderful, but it feels great.
No, it's well deserved. I can imagine what a thrill it would be, and especially that it came as a surprise. I mean, I remember. So a buddy of mine is a cartoonist. His name is Greg Schiegel, and he does a line of graphic novels for kids called for all ages, called Pix. And I remember in one of the volumes he had a bunch of podcast titles of shows that he listened to, and he just kind of like hid them in the background. And one of my shows was one of the ones listed there, and it was just like a cool little thrill of like, oh, like something I did has been memorialized in the medium that I love. It's like it's fantastic. So and that was just like to see yourself drawn by an artist whose work you admire doing what you love. I mean, that's what could be better. That's fantastic. So going back to this cosplay journey, we talked about this moment in 2017, right? You get bit by the cosplay bug. So,
Mhm.
and then you're developing these cosplays. How long does it take before you're like, okay, it's going to be we got to do Superman?
So that again was a twist because had it not been for Bizarro, I would never have been Superman. So the way that went down is I had become very involved in the Heroic Inner Kids charity at that time, just as a member. So I hadn't met them much prior, and I just raised my hand as a volunteer of, I'd like to help however I can. And they had a Superman, and their idea was it was the summer, and they wanted to start getting toy donations for Christmas. And so the then president, had this idea of we'll do a Bizarro Christmas because it's backwards. And so we'll get somebody, the Superman that they had, to dress as Bizarro and basically explain to everyone his perception of Christmas, which is you give him toys, and that's how we'll collect toys. And obviously, there'll be a sign behind him that will explain what we're actually doing. But wouldn't it be fun and funny if someone was out there interacting with the crowd and doing that? Um, and about 2 days before that was supposed to happen, I got a message from the president that said that the Superman they had couldn't do it. Um, and would I mind stepping in? And I thought, okay. Well, I didn't have a Bizarro shirt, so I actually just wore a regular Superman jogging shirt that I had that was tight fitting enough. And I had the pants too, because of course I'm going to run around the neighborhood dressed like Superman if I can. So I already owned that. I went to the Halloween store, got a $20 cape, and literally used safety pins to put it on. I found a woman's yellow belt, cut off the buckle, used some of the extra leather to cut out an oval, then cut out a smaller oval, super glued it onto the front, put Velcro in the back, no loops, just just um, and I believe someone else had some of those $50 Superman boots from China that were maybe one size too small for me, but in 2 days this is what we can do. But I did make the uh, Bizarro M #1 stone sign with the chain myself, and to this day I still have it. I'm very proud of it, and I just went out and I did that, and the reception that I got as Bizarro was really incredible because no one knew I was Bizarro. Not one person said, "Oh, it's Bizarro." Everyone just thought, "Oh, you're Superman. You're just talking funny." And everyone donated like crazy. And so the president said, "Hey, if we ever can't get the our regular Superman again, forget the Bizarro idea. Would you just be we call it in the theater, the understudy?" And I said, "That's not something I ever thought that I would do, but sure, why not?" Um, and the very next thing that we did was a event called Adoption Day, where children who have been waiting for a long time to be adopted go to the courthouse because it's finalized. The papers are ready. It's going to happen, and the families are there. But the specialness of that day is ink goes to paper, and you are officially adopted. You officially have a name that is officially your family, and you go home with them. And I thought, Adoption Day, Superman. I'm I'm doing that one. And there was another one that I thought, oh, I'm doing that one, and another one, and another one, and another one. And there was a point where I noticed I had really not done anything else for quite some time. And had never noticed because I was just so um, filled with the joy and the purpose and I guess all of those paths of my young life came together, all those things that I saw George Reeves do. Um, and I realized this is me doing it. Um, and so I never looked back. I never did anything other than basically double down. And I thought, okay, this is something that only a handful of people could have the chance to do, and I'm going to do it in the way that I hope lives up to the visage of Superman when he walks into a room and a child is about to talk to him and they're about to have a conversation. I want everything about that conversation and everything about meeting Superman to be exactly what that child hoped that it would be. So I've honestly, for the last 5 years, done nothing but just try to be that. And to the point of looking for podcasts to teach me how can I be that even better.
It's heartwarming to hear that story, and especially knowing the backstory and that episode of the George Reeves show, and what an inspiration that was, and to have a full circle moment, right, of being inspired by that, and then being able to do that for other people. I have technical questions right about the costume, and I want to get to that, but it sounds like you put a lot into how you carry yourself, right, and sort of the performance aspect of this. What goes into that, and is it the sort of thing where do you make a conscious effort to, I don't know, like not be on your cell phone or something, or like be out of character while you're there in that context?
Absolutely, for the charity visits, I totally do because I want it to be as convincing as possible. Um, at the conventions, it's much more difficult because the requests for selfies sort of take you out of that and
Yes.
such. Um, but I'm supported by the families when we do the charity visits because they want the same thing. They want that child to have the complete experience and escape from whatever it is that their challenge is at that time of life. Um, so even some of the older siblings they'll all play along. It's all a big gift in that way. So I spent a few years in my 30s as an actor, and I definitely bring as much of those lessons as I can into who I am when I take that first step into the room. So um, the backstory is no problem. I know the backstory of Superman, but there are some little mental tricks that I do. Yes, so that the persona is right. Um, you might find these interesting. So as far as the posture, I've learned that it's not that Superman should puff up his chest or tighten his abs or square his shoulders. Um, what I tell myself is, as Superman, there's always this little part of me that wants to fly, that wants to start just lifting up that little bit. That's my natural state, is to be in the air. And so I think I'm a man who wants to be in the air, but for right now is keeping his feet on the ground. And I found that that gives me a naturally taller posture, but still in that gentle, kind way, because my decision to stay on the ground is for the child. So there are tricks like that I've come up with over the years. Um, Another one is in that same way of Superman shouldn't be showing off and trying to look strong. So you never just walk into a room showing your biceps. But what I realized is, and very much like from the Tim Sale depiction and even the Frank Quitely depiction in All Star Superman, of what Superman actually is very careful. He's careful with everything and everyone, and he's careful with things, and he's careful with feelings because he knows he can break them, and he knows that he can unintentionally make someone jealous or feel inferior. And so that's another thing that I incorporate as I'm in the room of, I'm not here to be super over you. I'm being very careful that you are taken care of, and that you know that I like you and that you know that I'm your friend. And what I've noticed in the photographs that the families will send me later is it comes across as strength. It comes across as that the type of strength that Christopher Reeve had when he's sitting and talking to Lois, or when he's just standing on a map telling Luther he doesn't need a geography lesson. You never doubt who and what he is, but it's um, it's not posing for a photo. So to paraphrase, I'm in that room for a reason, and it's not to pose for photographs.
I love that. And fascinating that you have that acting background as well. What sort of acting work did you do for those years?
Don't get excited. It was mostly extra work, but I did start to get some roles in some local Dallas independent films, and I did a decent amount of commercial work and some print advertising. Again, it was a complete accident. I fell into it because I was an art director for a magazine, and one day the model didn't show up, and so someone needed to step in, and we kept having some of those, and then it sort of grew from there. But there were some very valuable lessons that I was taught because I did start to take it seriously and take classes, and many of the things that I learned in those classes I still apply.
the the acting experience, the art background, the love of Superman, to see all of that coalesce in what you've been doing, it's fantastic. I mean, it's just like what a natural fit, and that's fantastic that you've been able to create those experiences for kids and for others who have interacted with you. It's really it's a wonderful thing. And on the, I guess, more the technical side of it, how has the costume evolved? Because I've seen your photos, and it seems primarily the Christopher Reeve costume. I saw recently a Kingdom Come version. How has the costume grown? How many variations are there? How many do you aim for, if any?
So there are some that I do just for me, just for fun, like this Smallville shirt. But the Christopher Reeve one obviously is the one that I wanted to get um, screen perfect. Not not again, not for the photos, but because you can't help but feel authentic when you wear something that is so much like it came from the same film set as Superman the movie. Um, so I started out briefly. I even considered doing a Cavill version. So there's, I think, maybe 3 or 4 pictures of me in that. But to be honest, that's not my body type. And so, although I loved the way Henry looked in Man of Steel, and I'm a big Henry Cavill fan, um, I decided that over time, as I could afford to, I would upgrade the Christopher Reeve suit, and went through various stages, and have realized that there's different people in different parts of the planet that are best at the different aspects of the suit. And I could tell you all their names. I know who makes the best boots. I know who makes the best belt. I know who makes the best cape. Um, and I've just about finished putting together the absolute edition of my Christopher Reeve suit. Um, but here's an interesting thing is I go to so many of these events, and it never dawned on me how many times I'm down on one knee talking to a child, or um, where I'm, leaning down talking to someone, but we're on grass. And so I've gone through a couple of boots. I've unknowingly messed up a cape because I didn't realize how it was dragging and what it was in, and so on. So at this point, I'm completely mentally justifying to myself why I need to have three just amazing suits. Um, and I tell my wife, like, look, it's not about me. But I need three of them. Um, but the Kingdom Come suit was to honor someone else. And this goes back to how I got in the charity world in the first place. It was due to one person, and he did two things. He did the Adam West Batman, and he did the George Reeves Superman. So we were instantly friends. And then later, he made a Kingdom Come costume for himself. Well, he's an older gentleman, and he's older than I am. And so one day he decided to retire the Kingdom Come suit and surprised me by giving it to me. But he said, I'm keeping the cape because I'm also doing Odin. I said, totally understand. And you're going to rock Odin. Um, so I had fun putting together the rest of it, but fully 100% with the intention of going to those same events that John used to go to as his Kingdom Come Superman, so that the kids could still have one. Um, and I will still wear it. I will still do that one. It's nice to know that Jor-El's not the only character that's in my future as I age. I could also do the Kingdom Come Superman. I'm getting a little gray here on the sides, but I'm ready.
Oh, that's awesome. Were you did you follow the Arrowverse shows and the Crisis event in particular by any chance?
Uh, yeah, when the first season of Arrow came on, I was hooked. I thought that was a fantastic treatment. I did watch the Crisis episodes, and laughed with Lois's response to each increasingly more handsome Superman that she met. I thought that was hilarious. But we were also glad to see Brandon, and we were, geeking out over all the details. The newspaper on the wall behind him of the attack on the Daily Planet that was straight out of Kingdom Come. The costume itself, of course, just his more mature portrayal. Um, like I couldn't have loved it more to see Brandon back and Kevin Conroy as the Dark Knight Bruce. Both, yeah.
Absolutely. And I asked because I was curious, as someone who's such a fan of the Christopher Reeve incarnation of the character, of course, Brandon Routh in Superman Returns was ostensibly playing that version of the character, and then
Hmm.
that version in Crisis becomes Kingdom Come Superman. Do you sort of like that progression for that version of the character that was so formative for you?
I like it. I like it, especially when I think that if this is the same Superman, he's already lost Lois once and went back in time. By the way, he didn't turn the world back. He went back in time himself to save her once. And the thought that he's now lost her twice, I could see how that would have broken him in the same way that it broke the Kingdom Come Superman. So I am totally on board that it's a singular timeline with a singular character.
Right on, right on. Oh, and as far as these people who you are finding to where you're sourcing these pieces of the costume, where are you finding them? Is it through? I mean, again, through meeting at convention, through the forums, or a mixture?
Some of them are on Facebook that I just joined a few of the groups, especially the costuming groups, and you quickly find out who the really superior, talented costume makers are. Before I have my current suit, and it's almost indistinguishable, by the way. My original Superman suit was made by a guy named Scott Bales, who is tremendous, who had made a Superboy suit for someone, and that purchase didn't go through. So he posted it on Facebook and said, "Does anybody want this? It fits a guy about 5'10" to 6 foot, weighing roughly 170 to 180 pounds." And I went, I couldn't hit the button fast enough because I'd been making my own piecemeal up until then, and there was nothing like putting on one that Scott made. And then later, when I saved up some, I got another one from Action Costumes. But I still go back to Scott for a lot of things.
Nice, nice.
In,
And
in fact, I'll tell you that I went back to Scott with a special request because when I do the Clark Kent visits and I do the shirt rip and I let the kids see the secret of, I know I'm Clark Kent, but look, let me show you something. Um, I was wearing the whole head to toe tunic and leggings underneath. It's hot underneath an entire, reporter's suit. So I wrote Scott and I said, "Hey, can you do me a favor? Can you make a T-shirt, but inlay stitch the Christopher Reeve emblem so that I can wear it underneath my Clark suit and so on?" Um, and he said, "Oh, that's a great idea. I should have thought of that to begin with." So yeah, I depend on these guys. The woman who made my Kingdom Come cape is the one who made my very first cape ever back when I was graduating from being Bizarro. So it was even very nostalgic for me to go back to her here again in Dallas and say, "Would you do something for me?"
nice. Are there any other variations that you're working on or that you have aspirations for? I think I saw a photo of you in a Fleischer. Was that just a shirt, or was that building towards a costume? I can't remember.
I would like to do a Fleischer. Hmm. Yeah. As this has progressed, I've been contacted and become friends with a lot of really good photographers, and some of their um, ideas of what they could do um, are pretty great. And the Fleischer cartoons were something that I discovered later, but fit right in with my ideal of who I thought Superman was. And so the idea of specifically doing photo shoots to duplicate some of those outstanding moments from Fleischer cartoons is worth me building the entire suit to do. I realize I maybe only have another 10 years of doing this and still looking the part. So I'm I'm wanting to do it all.
Are there other? Because obviously Superman has had many different variations to his look over the years. Very shortly, I'm going to be delving back into the later part of the Triangle era when he had his electric costume. I'm just curious, for cosplay purposes or otherwise, even just generally speaking, are there any other looks that he's had in comics or other adaptations that you are particularly fond of?
Um, this is a sideways way to answer your question, but there's some Clark Kent looks that I'm really fond of.
Okay.
that I might like to do. Something I've not yet done, but I definitely want to do is go to a convention, spend the first half of the day as Clark, and come back the second half of the day as Superman, and try to meet all the same people. Um, but I would love to do the Fleischer blue Clark suit, and then have the Fleischer Superman suit, and then come back and have the Christopher Reeve Kent, and then the Christopher Reeve Superman. Um, there are there are variations of the super suit, but I think I'm just so in love with the Reeve one.
Look, it's a classic. You can't go wrong with that. Absolutely. Have you been told even before you started doing this? Have people ever told you you look like Superman? Is that something you'd gotten in your life before you embarked on this?
No, no, never. No. Mark Ruffalo, maybe on a good day, but not until I think I really started trying. And then, like now, my hair just does this. I can't get it to not do this. And now I will get that. But much like your friend who does Lobo, I mean, I did decide I'm going to start working out. I'm going to start, doing some things, and I think maybe I carry myself differently now than I did before. So I'll get some comments sometimes at a gas station or at a random place, and somebody will say, "Did anyone ever tell you?" And I'll always smile because it's still recent for me, and it's still a wonderfully kind compliment. I mean, talk about someone to be compared to. If someone says, "You look like Superman," so um, only only within the past few years, but I'll take it.
Yeah, I will, and I don't say this, in a to pat myself on the back, but I've gotten people have said Tom Welling. I've gotten that a few times, and
Hmm.
especially recently, I think I don't know if this is as much of a compliment because I'm more in the context of like the current older Tom Welling, like who's doing the Talkville podcast and is graying a little bit. It's like, all right, but I'll still take it. I'll still take it. But yeah, I know it's like to be likened to, to your favorite character or, a certain, representation of your favorite character, a certain portrayal. It's it's a nice feather in your cap. So that's fantastic. I was going to ask about the fitness piece of it. So what, like what sort of workout regimen are you in now as you're gearing up for the next outing?
So my next outing is at the end of March, and I'll again be meeting some of the original actors from the Reeve films. Um, I signed up for the classes at the 24-hour fitness here because I've realized that the group participation is what helps me not quit early. And know thyself. I will have a habit of being here at the house and getting to a certain point of being tired and saying, I'm going to call it. But I'll do what they call a body pump, which uses some 5 to 10 pound weights in various ways. But it's also pretty aerobic, and it'll get you tired. Um, but those alternate with a body combat class, which is basically boxing while you're not ever staying still. And I love it because in my mind, I'm like, okay, what I'm really doing right now is training to be Daredevil. And I switch characters, and everything that happens in that body combat, I'm thinking this is the hallway fight scene from the first season of Daredevil, and I absolutely love it. But I've noticed that that's done a lot to work out the kinks of being older. And in my job, I sit at my desk all day. I just sit in a chair. Um, so it's nice to get out of the house and go do those classes. And I've noticed that when I first started, I stayed in the very back row so I could quit early, and no one would notice that I gave up. But as I get more confidence, I'll move up in class. So the day I get to the front row, I think I'll have really achieved something.
No, right on. No, I listen. I admire the commitment, the dedication. I know what goes into that, and I'm sure having that goal, right, is a fantastic motivator. And now, correct me if I'm wrong. Your wife has gotten in on this too recently, right? Was a Miss?
She
Was she
has.
Miss? Yeah, Miss Tessmacher, right?
She was Miss Tessmacher, and she also does the Linda Carter Wonder Woman with me.
How much? Now, was this something that she was like, "Hey, I want to do this with you"? Did you have to rope her into it? How much? How much back and forth? What was this something she was like really keen to do?
I will say I only half had to rope her into it, and her heart was there with the wanting to do for children what she saw me doing. Um, but I think the Linda Carter costume is quite a thing to ask someone to wear, and so that took some roping. But she's gotten some tremendous response from that, and so it's less roping every time. It depends.
No, that's great. I love that that's something that you can share, together. And as far as responses, especially when you are meeting these kids as Superman, I mean, what are the most common responses or questions or reactions that you get?
Oh my. Oh, see, now you've hit the fun part. You've absolutely hit the fun part because there is nothing like what comes out of a child's mouth when they meet Superman. I have had everything from one sibling ratting out their other sibling for all the bad things that they've done, and they will look me right in the eye and say, "Okay, take him to jail now," and expect that that's how justice works. I've told you what he did. I I told you what he did to me. Now you take him to jail, and they'll stand there waiting for me to for me to do it. Um, I have seen um, a child, an older sibling, had his younger one in a headlock, and we were at the Dallas Mavericks arena, and I was walking on up one of the hallways, and I saw this from behind, so the back of the older brother's head, and I just came up and I tapped him on the shoulder, and I just said in my deep Superman voice, "Be nice to your brother." And this kid doesn't know anything. He just knows someone has tapped him on the shoulder. So he starts to turn around with this look of who thinks they can tell me. And he got about this far and saw the red and the yellow and the blue and the hair. And his face went from, I'm going to be, and then just goes, and he just nods silently, doesn't say a word, and just releases his brother and puts his hands up in the air. And I looked up into the eyes of his parents and they mouthed, "Thank you." I have no idea, and I just walked away because at that point you have to do the cool guy walk away. You can't just stand there. And so by the time he fully comprehended what had just happened, there was nothing but cape just leaving. I would love to know what he thought of that moment later on, as he grew up. There are kids who want to test my strength, and so I either have a good answer for why I can't do something. So, for example, a child will say, "Fly for me," and my answer is, if there are other heroes around, if we're at a group event, I'll say, "Well, there are heroes here who can't, and it makes them feel bad if I do because they can't, and I don't like to make anybody feel bad." That's one answer. If I'm alone, it's, well, Lex is always trying to find me, and if I fly, he'll find me, and I don't want anything to happen while I'm here. I want it to just be nice, so let's not do that. Um, but typically, my way out of feats of strength is I've become pretty good at arm wrestling, and even a teenager up to about 13 years old, I can still take him, but in a way where they won't be able to move my arm at all. And so I'll challenge them. I also think there's a bit of psychology that goes in that, in the same way, Batman's costume just makes you fearful and therefore you are weaker. I think just the fact that Superman is putting his arm up like this and says, "See if you can move my arm," and doesn't blink and doesn't change his voice. Um, they are not surprised at all when they can't, and then the testing of me stops. Um, we had a wonderful story of my wife and I. She was Wonder Woman. We went to this girl's house, and it was the second time that we had been there. And some of her little friends were out in the street, and she told everybody that's the real Wonder Woman because they had been visited by someone else before dressed as Wonder Woman, and she tried to explain to her friends that's not the real one. I know the real one. And so she wanted everyone to be there when the real one showed up. So the absorption of wanting to believe is really charming. The interactions that you have, and my favorite one ever has to be recently. I was at a convention center here in Dallas, and a little girl was probably about 8 years old, and she was dressed as Princess Leia. And she came up to me and she put her hand on my blue shoulder, and she looked up and said, "I'm sorry your planet blew up too."
That's yeah. I mean, stuff like that. It warms the heart, and I love hearing about how you had navigate all of that and handle some of those requests. And the psychological aspect is fascinating, and I could imagine how a kid buying into the imagery, right, and what you're putting forth, right? Yeah, maybe they're not as strong as they typically are, right? Like that
Hmm.
little bit of effect that's going on. And I'm curious, as a Superman fan, right? Like at some point we all think and talk about how believable or not it is that the Clark Kent disguise works. But do you do you come away from this experience feeling more like, yeah, I could understand how people wouldn't make the connection, because when you see Superman, right, you just so buy into that image, that person. The idea of it being someone else, it's like it's not even in the equation. Is that something that you've pondered?
Yes, in fact, I've I fully subscribe to the theory that is not my theory. It's been out there, that people think you're Superman. Why would you ever be anything else?
Right.
They're not looking for what else are you. They're not thinking that the guy next to them on the subway might be Superman because he's not dressed like Superman. If I were Superman, I would be Superman every second of every day. So they just aren't looking, and therefore anybody can sort of resemble him, you know, um, and that's how he gets away with it. That and the physical uh, posture changes and his personality changes and so on. But if you're not looking for something, then it's not going to jump out at you. Um, but I will tell you that I also have the inverse experience of when I'm not in my super suit, when I change at the end of the day, just back into my normal clothes, I can walk right past all those same people, and they don't know it's me. And I'm not wearing glasses, or but it's just they're not looking, and it's a bit of a relief because at the end of a convention, um, I love them, and I've accepted that a lot of it is walk 5 feet, pose for photos, walk 5 feet, pose for photos, and then when I'm back in my mild mannered clothes, I can go anywhere. I can do anything. I can have this freedom. And I say that only because when a writer gets Clark Kent right and they show how much he treasures that, how much he treasures that he can have a date with Lois, or that real life that he grew up with as a kid on a farm, that he hasn't had to lose that. um, it's not just a literary device. I'm telling you, it's a it's a lightness and a freedom where I look around at hundreds of people and I think I could do anything. So,
No, absolutely. That's why it and broke my heart and it drove me nuts in the comics a few years ago when Clark revealed his identity to the world. And thankfully that genie's been put back in the bottle, because I feel like
mhm,
from a storytelling perspective, yes, it opens up some new avenues, but I feel like you're losing more than you're gaining. And just as someone who loves this character, right, and wants the best for him, like it was a decision that it was like I could not understand or get on board with for that reason. And especially having just reread All Star Superman, when he writes his last will and testament, and to Clark Kent,
mhm,
right, who never let me forget what it's like to be an ordinary downtrodden man. It's like,
mhm,
yes, on a practical level, it allows him to not be Superman all the time and engage with the world, but also to understand like what people are going through, right, in a way that you just can't if you're just always Superman. So, uh, yeah, it's a fascinating, and then again, the psychology of it really is fascinating.
yeah, yeah. I just read Action, 1050, and really liked the way that they handled putting that genie back in the bottle. and they made some good points. When Bruce tells Clark, the effect that it had on Lois was unintended, that she went from being this incredibly powerful force for good to being seen as just the wife of Superman. And even Clark admits that he didn't really think that all the way through. And I get why they did it, because it's an example of, if Superman is the paragon of truth, how is it that he lives deceiving everyone? Maybe he should live up to uh, what he says he's all about, and be truthful. So I understand why they did it, but I think it's a fair statement to say that it didn't work, and I'm glad that it's back.
So so you're still reading, still collecting? Have you had gaps in your super fandom, or have you mostly been consistent all the way through?
Well, as you can imagine, over the last 4 years, I've gotten as much Superman source material as I can get. Some of which I had as a kid, and I've dug back out. So, like, here's my original copy of Miracle Monday from 1980, and I have my Son of Krypton from '78. Um, but I've gotten to where there are some writers who I just trust, and I will just go online and say, "Have you written a Superman story? Purchase, 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 purchase." And so there are some current ones. I think Tom Taylor's amazing. I think Tom King is amazing. So I'm back on the train for the storylines for some of those. Loving what Mike Allred's doing with Space Age. I know he's not the writer, but I'm loving that series, and I'm filling in some of the gaps that I guess I'm sure of.
Nice, nice. No, that's yeah, there's some good stuff right now. I actually finally, I was late to the game on this, but I finally read the Tom Taylor Son of Kal-El series. We'll be talking
Hmm.
about it in just a couple of weeks, and just and loved it. It was terrific. It was basically what everyone described it to be, and I was just late to it, but I really really enjoyed it. So yeah, it feels like you know. I wasn't so hot on the Bendis stuff and all of that, but it feels like we're in a good spot, and there's some energy, there's excitement. We have more Superman titles and projects than we've had for a while. So it's again, it feels like there's some energy and some momentum here.
Yeah, and I'm loving what they're doing with John, and the dynamic that John and Clark have as father and son. And again, because I so loved all of the Pa Kent lessons to Clark, any scene where I can see that Clark is thinking back and pulling Pa forward and teaching John what he knows is right and what he knows is good, because you know uh, this is what Pa would have said. And you can tell the undercurrent of when those moments are. And then to see John out there finding his own way, and then every now and then you're proud for him, in the same way that before John aged up, the scene where he was in the cave, and it was Nightwing that went in the cave,
Yeah.
not full Batman suit Bruce, but it was Nightwing, and the conversation that he had, the sympathetic and empathetic conversation he had with a scared young John in that cave, I was hooked. This writer has me for a good long time, um, because those are those connecting moments of, we we have to explain to people in the outside world why we love comics sometimes, and one of the eye rolling aspects, I guess, is not that they're for children, but just that, oh, there's just fighting all the time. Every issue is just fighting and fighting and fighting, and now we're to a point where that's not true. Many of them are um, conflict resolution stories and growth stories and acceptance stories. And that's one of the things I really love about the age that we live in now, and where everyone's taking it. And can't get enough. Like, fill the world with those, and I'll be a happy guy.
Same here. This whole new pocket of the Superman mythology between the current comics and Superman and Lois of Clark as a father And again, especially loving Smallville and loving the scenes with Pa and Clark, to now see him on the other side of it, and to be going through it in my own life, and then it's like it's I love it. I can't get enough of that either. I hope it's something that, and I don't know how long we'll have Superman and Lois, and I know the next time there's a new movie, it's gonna be a younger Superman. So, but I hope this version of him as a father is something that we get to continue to see, because I think it's a great way to move the mythology forward, and and again, just thematically, like it brings so much full circle. It's been such a delight over these past few years.
Hmm. Yeah. It's just, I think it all comes down to, even Lex said it in this last issue of the world needs Superman. And Lex said it begrudgingly, and he had his own, ultimate evil reveal that that speech was leading up to. But when even Lex admits it, then that's pretty powerful. And I'm glad that this new direction in the comics is happening. I am excited to see what James Gunn's going to do, just based on his statement that, Clark Kent is going to, or Superman will be kindness in a world that thinks that that's not, you know, what fits in. Um, but I think it's because I've seen at a hospital level, what it can mean. Um, there was a time where we went to visit the same little girl that I told you the story about being in the street with her friends. The reason we were at her house the first time was for a relative of hers, who had special needs, and his favorite character was Superman. And so it was the very first time that we had gone there. But we also knew that there was this little girl, and I am the sibling uh, of a child who had a lot of medical issues. So my little sister when I was growing up. So I remember what it was like to be the sibling, where of course it's, your sister who needs all the attention, but that doesn't mean you completely understand it, and it doesn't mean you don't still need some attention yourself. So I have a big place in my heart for the siblings of the kids that are going through these medical challenges. And so we went there, and she just had the best time with Wonder Woman. So while Superman was there to visit the child, she just had this best time with Wonder Woman. Um, and I want to say it was 2 days later we got a message that that little girl had suddenly had her appendix burst, and it was a shock to everyone. And she was in the hospital, and she asked if Wonder Woman could come see her, not Superman, but Wonder Woman, who she had made friends with. And so I came anyway, and we were told before we got there that she wasn't eating, had no interest in eating. Um, and then we spent some time with her. And when we left, about 4 hours later, we got a text from her grandfather that showed us a picture, and she had nothing but goldfish crackers all spread out in front of her on the little tray in her bed, and that she had said, "I want to be strong like Wonder Woman," and had asked for something to eat. And those are those unpredictable, intangible things that happen that you have no idea of the effect. You just know that you were sincere and you were genuine and you wanted to be there. Um, one of the great moments I loved on one of the episodes that I listened to you uh, was when you were talking about parenthood, and how one of the biggest lessons that you learned was to just be there.
Yep.
And I listened to that episode. I was in Detroit about to go to the Reeve reunion when I heard that episode, and how much the lessons of fatherhood from the Smallville show affected you. Um, but that the thing that really matters to a child is that their dad was there. He was just there. Didn't have to have all the answers. And so that that always surprises me when I think, well, I know that's what we can do. We can be there, and we can for that time make them the most important thing in the entire universe. And the effect that that has later is totally loving and surprising. Um, we've had doctors tell us that we can achieve things that parents can't, doctors can't, nurses can't. Like there's just something about wearing the cape that can make someone see the world differently. And I know it's a cliche that the symbol means hope, um, but I've seen it. It does. And in some of my backstory, getting myself, mentally in the right place to come do these things, and much in line with the All Star Superman scene of the girl on the ledge of the building and such. I have come to define Superman being called the Man of Tomorrow in the way that if you can make it to tomorrow, there's hope.
I love that. I love that. I think that's a beautiful way to put it. And as you're talking about getting yourself in the mindset, that's something that I was thinking about. Knowing what you do with all of these visits, and I don't even know how to ask this, but it's just, I mean, it must be beyond heartbreaking to see anyone, but especially children, in the circumstances, right? Whether it's illness or whatever other adverse situation that they're dealing with. And I mean, I would imagine that must take an emotional toll. Yet at the same time, the positive impact that you're having, and so I'm sure that that goes such a long way. But again, I don't even know that there's a question there. Just that I'm, it's we're talking about, yeah, how you build a costume, or how you get in shape, how you sort of get in character. But there's also this whole other piece of, again, like preparing yourself for, right, to
Hmm.
be what they need in that moment.
Well, I think the last thing you said hit on it. It's to be what they need. Um, but and please don't feel bad that you asked the question, because it's a natural question to ask. And I can tell you two things. One, we have lost some kids, and I have spoken at some funerals, and I have even written some of the eulogies. Um, the story I told you before about the little girl, and the boy that we were there to see, um, was buried with my Superman cape draped over his casket. But that never ever occurred to me as a reason to stop. And I want to explain that, because I'm not trying to put myself as better than anyone at dealing with these situations. The reason that I feel that way is because my sister, who I mentioned, was 2 years younger than I was. And so she was about 1 year old when she was diagnosed with childhood leukemia. So I was three, she was one. Um, it's the reason that we moved from Panama to the United States, was to find doctors. So from that age, we had this hope in the house that if we can do the right things, find the right doctors, that everything will be okay. And in the meantime, she was having radiation treatments, she was having bone marrow transplants, she was having chemotherapy. She gained some weight. Her hair came out, so she likes to wear fuzzy hats. But again, I'm three. I'm three and a half. I'm four. I'm aware of what's happening, but not fully aware. All I know is that sometimes she's at the hospital and I'm not allowed to go see her, but then sometimes she comes home. And when she's home, I'm just so happy that all I want to do is play. And she's so happy not to be at the hospital anymore. All she wants to do is play. So anything she wants to do, we will do. If she wants to play cowboys, then we will both put on our little childhood cowboy hats. I'll get my Davy Crockett coonskin hat, and our little plastic guns, and we will play cowboy, and she can be on her rocking horse. If we if she wants to be king and queen, we'll get our Burger King paper crowns, and we will be king and queen. So it became normal to me to be whatever the game said you were supposed to be for her. And it never occurred to me that what I'm doing now is any different. I am being what the escape needs to be for that child. And if that means big red boots and a long red cape, then I don't feel weird about it. And in the end, she lost her battle when she was 2.5, and I I think there's a part of me that would like to think she's proud of what I'm doing now, that we're still playing games so that the kid can forget for a little bit. Um, and when we make friends with a child now, I'm trying not to have that defensive protect my emotions part up, because I imagine that there are other family members who are sort of doing that. They're bracing themselves, and the kid doesn't need that from Superman too. So part of my getting in the right mind frame is to remind myself that I would not trade one single game that I played with my sister for anything, because I was naive enough not to know that this might be our last game, that might be our last game. So we fully lived each time. So I try to remind myself of that, and I'll go into the room thinking we're just going to make this the best time. Nothing else matters. Nothing else exists except what we're going to enjoy. And if it means me being silly and making funny faces, if that's what the kid responds to, then I'll do it. It's whatever. It's whatever that moment um, reveals itself to need. And you can feel when you like what's best when you're there. Um, Going back to what we were saying, like if you're there, you can feel it. And later, if against everyone's best efforts we lose that child, um, I feel awful, but I don't feel bad that we spent that time the way that we did. And so I'm ready to do the next one if I'm asked.
I'm very sorry about your sister, and I appreciate you sharing all of that and how it's informed your approach. And I find it very moving. I would imagine people listening to this or watching will as well. And I've said versions of this throughout our whole episode here, but what you're able to do, what you're able to provide, is again when we talk about this character and the ideals and what he stands for. I mean, look, I end every show by saying it's about what you do, it's about action, and you're doing that. And I've just from the photos that I've seen, right, and just sort of the the smiles and the reactions that you're getting and that experience that you're able to provide for someone in like impossible circumstances is very inspirational. So from one Superman fan to another, it's like, thank you for what you're doing. It's like I said, and there's nothing wrong with just being a cosplayer, but as I learned more about you and got more of a sense of what it is you do, I knew this conversation was going to go in a different direction. And, as fascinating as it is to, learn about how you put the costume together, like I love that piece of it, but this speaks to something, that really gets at the core of what all of this is about. So, I mean, I can't thank you enough for everything that you've shared. Is there any aspect of your Superman fan journey, the cosplay journey, the work that you do that we haven't talked about that you wanted to?
Um, I I love that I have met some of the best people that I would never have met had I not told myself and given myself permission to try living up to an ideal. Because I think there's a part of me, and again, I have to be honest with myself, there's a part of me that thinks if I can't do it perfectly, maybe I shouldn't do it. So there were definitely moments where I thought this is a heck of a thing to swing for, to be to be Superman, without a padded suit, without anything, like to just. And I would say, like, going back to your question of is it rough to talk to these kids and the families, because the families are hurting too. I very well remember my mom and dad going through that time. And the thing that I'll say though is when I'm asked, isn't it hard for you to be around sad children? My answer is, I don't know. I've never met one. Because when I walk into the room, they are not sad. And the families are uplifted to see a smile on that child's face. And they'll tell me often later that that's the first one they've seen in weeks. And there was a time where I was told a boy who beat the cancer, and in the rules of the Make a Wish Foundation, you still get your trip to Disneyland even if you beat the cancer, which is fantastic. And we work with Make a Wish. I love everything about them. And his parents told me he went to Disneyland. He talked about it for about 4 days. He met Superman. He talked about it for a month. And that's the part that I think rejuvenates me, is that I am providing that for their family too, to be able to see that spark in their child again, and to see them smile again, and to see them say, I want to eat, or um, I'm actually not scared about my operation tomorrow, or whatever it is that that visit may have helped with, that passing along of the strength maybe, um, or the treating them with that you can do it, um, part of every hero's story. Every hero has the moment where it you really think you can't do it, but somehow you dig in and you find that you can. Um, One of my favorite single Superman comic panels of all time is when he looks back over his right shoulder and says, "It's going to be okay." I've got that printed out and cut out, and it's on my wall. I love everything that because that's how I feel. Um, there's like, I look at that panel and I think if he told me that, I would believe it. I would absolutely believe it with that sincerity. And if that's something that I can do, then great. Um, but what I'm getting at is those families are some of the best people that I have ever met. And through virtue of, I guess they're strong because they have to be, or they pull together because they have to. But you want to talk about some positive, loving, strong people. Meet the families of kids who are going through something. And part of my answer when people say, "Isn't it rough on you when you go to these visits?" I say, no, because beyond the fact that it gives you perspective to be grateful about your own life, it's that when you see everything that these families are and all the goodness, it's like a seesaw where they're this huge boulder of goodness. You know that you spend all of your time around good people, just family after family after family, kid after kid after kid who have these huge hearts. And then something in life happens. You wreck your car, you get sick, you need foundation repair on your house, whatever. That's like a pebble on the other side of the seesaw, and it doesn't even move it. And I found that those things in life that just happen, they happen to everybody. Because I spend so much time with these families, it totally puts into perspective these other naturally occurring things in life that are easily navigatable. And that I think would be one thing that I would never have predicted, but my life is so much better for it.
That's that's beautiful. It's beautiful. And when you talk about going in like without the padding in the suit, right? And not especially at the outset, and not knowing what it was going to be like. I think well, again, kind of bringing us full circle and talking about the the versions of Superman on screen in particular that resonated the most with you. I've had a similar experience watching both of them, and especially more recently George Reeves, and it's like, yeah, from a costume perspective, relatively simple, right? Like, but it's just the presence, right? That innate goodness that emanates from them. And I've used this example on the show, and I don't always mean to beat up on poor Kirk Allen in the movie serials, but I watched those movie serials, and I just never could shake the feeling like, oh, that's a guy in a costume. But when I watch George Reeves, it's like, no, that's Superman. Like there is just something that's there,
Hmm.
and so it sounds like that's something that you've been able to tap into in what you do. I do have. I'll let you go because we're just about to hit the 2 hour mark. Although we talked about this ahead of time, this will probably be 2 hours. But I am curious. Um, where I mean, I don't know if you have any sense of this, but like, where does it seem like kids know Superman from in your experience? And this, like I have a long history with my local comic shop and comic book stores across the country, and this question always comes up about the ongoing viability of, I mean, the characters generally, but especially the medium of comics and this and that, and how people are meeting these characters. So I'm just curious, like where if you have a sense, where do they tend to know Superman from, or is are there instances where this is the first time they're meeting Superman, but the costume and the presence is such that they're just like instantly hooked?
Um, lately, it's they've seen the Henry Cavill movies,
Okay.
or their bedrooms are just decked out with Superman things, and they're wearing Superman shirts. And so those can vary what era and what art style they are consist of. So it's it almost never happens that a child knows who Christopher Reeve is or references that version. But I just think the uh, the red and blue is still just Superman, and they know what they know. They know Superman is good. They know Superman is a friend. Um, the instant response that I get from being Superman, I could only equate to being Santa Claus, of a child 100% down to their core, just running up saying, "You're good. I want to hug you. I want to tell you everything. I want to share all of my experiences and all of my thoughts because you're Superman. And I know that I have nothing to be afraid of right now." And that I have noticed that regardless of the entry point of why a child knows Superman, that is almost always the result. It just stands for feeling that safe that you can do that.
It's fascinating to hear that because, right, it's not just that, because look, from just the iconography, the symbol is
Hmm.
known globally, right? So but it's one thing, oh, that they recognize the symbol or the costume, but to actually have some sort of sense of what this means, who this person is that's really really powerful. Daniel, I can't thank you enough for sharing your journey with us here. This really was a pleasure. I know this won't be the last time that we speak. I hope we can continue to chat in the future, and we'll definitely get you on the George Reef show at some point as well. I think we'd have a great conversation there too. But certainly, I encourage everyone to follow you on Instagram at Wearing the Cape. But is there anything else you want to share with people? Anywhere you might want to direct them, or information you want to share about heroic inner kids, or anything else?
Yeah, let me say two things. One, um, anyone can wear the cape. It's just a matter of, do you feel like um, there's something that you are passionate enough about to go out and do it, then that's your cape. And so I would encourage you to find something that makes you feel that way. It does not have to be the type of charity that we do, but certainly there's something in your life that you feel like that's your cape that you can go do. Um, and I could tell you that every step along the way is worth it. Um, if you want to sort of help us in what we do, the charity website is heroicinnerkids plural.org, and we take volunteers of all types, in costume and not in costume. Many of our volunteers drive to give the gifts. Um, uh, we have done many things, including we went to Uvalde to visit some of the kids after the shooting that was down there. Um, but it's a good organization. I'm currently the president of it, and if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer. So message away on Instagram. Um, but yeah, I think find a way to find your place in the world where you can feel like that's your cape, and you won't regret it.
Well said. This was a special episode, and again, I thank you so much for your time and for sharing your story. And I would imagine the audience echoes that as well. So really, thank you so much for being part of this, and thank you for reaching out.
Oh, thank you. I really have been a fan of your show, and I wasn't kidding. It was an honor to be asked to be on it, and I look forward to more chances to talk.
Likewise, likewise. This was an honor for me. So thank you. So thank you, Daniel. Thank you, audience. As always, I always appreciate you tuning in. Make sure you come back next week. Next week, in this episode, we referenced Superman and Lois a bunch. Our next episode next week, we'll be talking about season 2 of the television series. So make sure you come back for that. As always, it's about what you do. It's about action. This show is part of the Flat Squirrel Podcast Network, home to Digging for Kryptonite, another exciting episode in the adventures of Superman, Summoning the Zords, and My Comic Shop History, available wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to subscribe and leave a review today. Sign up at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato for additional content. Thank you all.